Imagine a world where you knew that you mattered and you belonged. The people cared about you because we were so darn good at listening to one another, no matter how different we are. That is what Sidewalk Talk is doing by putting listeners on sidewalks all over the world so that we can practice the art of connecting. Join me, founder and director Traci, as I interview experts on the fine art of human connection and interview some of our volunteers who've been listening on the sidewalk and even some of the folks that we've listened to. And if you want to volunteer, consider joining us at sidewalk-talk.org. So, Reverend Barbara F. Meyers is in her 70s, and she is the most prolific Sidewalk Talk listener. For years now, she's been sitting out in some of the roughest neighborhoods in San Francisco, listening sometimes twice and 3 times a week, always weekly. And she's a Unitarian Universalist community minister. She's got a ministry based in Fremont, California, and she's the assistant director of the Life Reaching Across to Life Peer Support Center. But what she's coming to talk to us about is really her story on how she became a mental health advocate, and her new book, which I love the title, y'all. Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health, which has been published by Skinner House Books. It's out now. You can get it. She's going to talk a lot about her own experience with her own mental health issues, her experience being in a church congregation with mental health issues. And my hope is that the impact of this podcast is that folks at churches hear it and will grab her book and have book clubs at their churches, because I think for many folks that maybe are apprehensive about getting mental health support, sometimes the church is the first place that they're going to go. And knowing how to actually hold someone is a really potent and powerful skill that I don't think anybody does better than Barbara, frankly. So, listen in. It's going to be a lively conversation, hearing all about Barbara's life and her new book, Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health. Barbara! So I'm actually was nervous to get to interview you tonight. Isn't that weird that we've known each other this long and I felt anxious?
Yeah.
But I think it's because we have an intimacy level, so it feels a little more intimate perhaps. And I think also because I'm feeling deeply moved and proud of your book. So for those of you that are watching that are part of Sidewalk Talk, you know Barbara, because I'm going to toot her horn a little bit. Barbara's listened more times than any Sidewalk Talk listener in our project. She's been listening in the Tenderloin in San Francisco weekly for 3 years. And she's a Universalist minister who I think is going to hopefully revolutionize the way that churches meet the needs of their congregants who are struggling with their mental health. And I know that writing a book is like birthing a child. So
yeah.
I want to hand it over to you and tell us just how did you become an advocate for mental health? What made you want to sit on sidewalks, and what made you want to write this book?
Okay, well, I come to this work largely as a result of my own personal experience with mental health crises myself, which started when shortly after my daughter was born, and that was in 1978. So that's how long ago that was. It's 42 years ago. And I had a severe postpartum depression, and that, and for which I was hospitalized in the psychiatric ward of our local hospital. And it was a shattering experience for me because I hadn't had anything like that before. And I was ashamed of it for a long time. And after a number of years, I went back to my psychiatrist and I said, I don't want to live my life like this, being so unhappy and so depressed about who I was and what I had been through. I want to get to the bottom of this and find out what the problem is. And so I entered in sort of a pretty regular set of psychotherapy sessions with him, and he was, wouldn't let me duck things, questions that I was, didn't want to address, um,
Mm,
and then at one session, he said, he asked me, "What are you doing for yourself spiritually?"
mm,
And I said, "Nothing," because
mm,
and I had been brought up in sort of an interdenominational Protestant church, and
mm,
I went to youth group, and I did a lot of those kinds of things. But after um, my college years, I had gone away from that, and so he said, "Well, would you like to learn how to meditate?" And the first thought that went in my mind was, "What? You gotta be kidding me! Just sitting around and doing nothing? Just how's that supposed to accomplish anything?" And
Well, because at
and
this point, weren't you at IBM, like hustling in the tech industry?
yeah, I worked for
Yeah.
IBM as a software engineer,
Yeah.
and my life was doing, 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 and more doing. And not a moment to spare between one start of one thing and the beginning of the next. And um, I had, a wonderful husband, a great job, a wonderful home, a beautiful little girl, and I was miserable,
Mm,
and I knew there was just something's wrong with this picture,
mm,
and
yeah.
so anyway, he gave me a little book about meditation, and um, he said, "I suggest that you read this and might want to try it." I thought, well, okay, God, I promised myself that I would try anything that he said because I was wanted to so much wanted to get over the feeling that I was having,
Mm,
that
yeah.
hating myself basically in my life.
Yeah.
And so I read the book, and I did sit. I sit for maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes sometimes, and it was literally the only time in my life when I wasn't rushing from one thing to the next.
Mm,
And I went back to um, see him the next time, and I told him, "I don't know where it came from, but I'm happy."
mm.
And
After 1 week, after one time of sitting?
well, this was a couple of weeks
I
of
see. Okay. Wow, that's
still a
fast.
really short time.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He pointed at me and he said, "It came from you."
Mm,
And it was just like, a total.
yeah.
I realized what he said was true, and it was so different from what I believed in before.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, that was the start of it, of my spiritual life. I mean, I was actually hospitalized again at one time, but it was not a shattering experience this time. I thought all of the other patients were all God's children, just like me, and that was a complete change in my whole self concept.
Mm,
and, and I realized that there was something spiritual that had happened there. And so I started going to church, and I um, went to a Unitarian Universalist church, and I told the minister, that I had just gotten out of the psychiatric ward, but I didn't tell anybody else in the church about it, because I still was too much for me to be public. And the people in that church were so welcoming and so, embracing of me as a fellow human being, involved in a lot of their projects and other things and um, they just treated me like a human being that had inherent worth and dignity, which is, one of the things we like to say in Unitarian Universalist practice. So
mm,
I realized how much. I realized what an important role that the congregation had played in my in my healing, and I eventually I helped start another congregation in my hometown, and then I started a depression support group at that church because I was now able to be more open about what I'd been through. And after a few years of doing the depression support group, I thought, well, gosh, maybe I could do a better job of this if I took a pastoral counseling class in seminary or something. So I contacted the Unitarian Seminary in Berkeley and asked them if I might take one of their classes as a special student. And so I did that. And um, about halfway through that class, I thought, this is what I was meant to do with my life. This is where I should be. So I retired from IBM, and I have nothing against the company. It was a great company to work for. My managers were wonderful, and when I told them my plans, they were really good in helping me plan this out and everything. And but my life had just turned in a different direction, and so I went to seminary for 4 years and had an internship, and I affiliated as what they call a community minister, which means the work I'm doing is not the minister of the church, but a minister in the outside community. And my intention all along was to focus on mental health issues because of what I had been through and how important I knew a congregation and a religious spiritual practice was um, in healing from some of these things. So I was affiliated with the congregation in Fremont, California as a community minister, and so that was in 2004. And so this is now 16 years that I've been doing this, and there isn't any real set roadmap for me to follow. I sort of do what I think needs to be done in the community and following my what I think is where I'm being led, and I've done a number of different things. There's a while I had a television program on public access TV that where I
I
interviewed
didn't know this about you.
I interviewed people about their experiences with mental health and how they recovered, and so I did that for a number of years, and with help start a counseling center in Fremont, which we were able to keep going for a couple of years before financially we couldn't make it happen anymore. And then most recently, it was the book that I wrote, and in which I was collecting a lot of the stories that I've heard from people that I've worked with throughout the years about things that have happened in church that were either very helpful or were very harmful to people. So I wrote the book as a way of trying to tell people how they could be supportive of people with mental health problems and their family members, that were in their congregations. And so anyway, I'm really happy. It was just August of 2020 that it came out finally, and
Your second baby.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So my fondest wish is that people will read it and in their congregations and find ways of helping other folks to do it. So to follow some of the lessons or not do some of the things that I say are harmful, so
Yeah.
anyway, now all of this time that I've been in these past 16 years, actually when I was in seminary, I volunteered. There's a peer support mental health center in Fremont here where I live, and I am the assistant director of that center, and have been doing that for even volunteering when I was in seminary, and for these 16 years that I've been employed there as a person to help others. So one of the things that in addition to my seminary degree, I also have a certificate in what's called spiritual direction. And I read this in the spiritual direction magazine that you get, when you're a spiritual director. This one article about
No,
a woman.
I don't, because I'm not a spiritual director, but you
Okay.
know.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, there was an article in there about this woman who had been. It was called Ministering to the Marginalized.
Yeah.
And so she talked to folks that were. This is a woman from Alaska, and then she sort of had this little place where she went, and anybody who came by, she would talk to. And she mostly went in areas where there were very few social services and a lot of people that were had a lot of need. And she created this, spiritual direction practice to marginalized people. And I read that, I thought, oh wow, if there's somebody I could do this with, that I'd really like to do something like that, So, um, so I went to this spiritual direction meeting, and there's another woman there who had read the same article and she said the same thing to herself, So we found each other, and she has been my partner, and we started, investigating what it would be like to sit on the sidewalk and talk to folks in underprivileged areas um, in San Francisco, and one of the things we learned about was Sidewalk Talk, and
Yay, we're
yeah,
so lucky.
yeah. So there was one time that we were when we were checking things out, there was a Sidewalk Talk event happening at what they call Lava May, which is a place where homeless people can take showers and get their hair cut and things like that. And then they also have folks from Sidewalk Talk come and let them talk, people, and listen to them. So we sort of sat, my friend and I sort of stood to the side, and he said, we looked at, and I think it was you, Traci, you were actually talking to someone, and there was another woman there as well talking to someone. And we looked at each other and we said, we can do that, So
I never knew that you showed up at a Lava May event.
yeah,
Sneaky,
well,
sneaky.
we didn't. I mean, we weren't really close. We were sort of far away, but we were just sort of watching what was going on. And so we decided that we were going to do that, and we signed up to be Sidewalk Talk listeners, and signed our release forms and got our T-shirts, and there was a place in San Francisco where I did my internship. It's called the Faithful Fool Street Ministry, and they accepted this Sidewalk Talk gig as being one of the things that they would say that they would try to do in the community. So all the chairs and the supplies and other things that we have, we keep them at the Faithful Fool Street Ministry, and our practice it was to go out every Thursday from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock and sit on the corner of Hyde and Turk in San Francisco, which is in the middle of the Tenderloin. It's a very poor neighborhood. There's a lot of poverty, drug abuse, homelessness, mental illness, and a lot of things where people are sort of down and out. How I would say, and so we set up our chairs and with a sign up that says "Free listening here today," and uh, whoever came by and was curious or wanted to stop by and talk, then we would talk to them, and and we did that on a weekly basis, every Thursday. So that's why have so many events, 3 years times every week, it adds up to a lot. Now with COVID, we haven't been able to do it for a while, but the idea is that we will go back when it's safe to do so, so.
That's beautiful. Well, so many things I want to say, but I'm going to ask you a question because I just want to keep you talking because I want to keep listening to you. So
Okay.
I'm so curious, you've done all this training, you've had your firsthand experience with your own mental health, then you go and do all this training and really get a context of how the church holds people struggling with mental illness. And then you're out on the sidewalk. And I'm curious what the differences are between being in a clinic versus a church versus a public sidewalk in terms of how people are with you.
Yeah. Well,
or how you are with them in those settings.
Right. Well, let's see. First, the church and the mental health center where I work. There's a lot of people now that from the mental health center that come to church, and a lot of people from the church have heard about what I'm doing, and they've had troubles, and they've gone to the mental health center. So there's a knowledge there where there's a little bit. I mean, not everybody, but there's an overlap of numbers of folks that have been in both places, and of course we know those people, and most of them are, coming back on repeats, and a lot of what we do in the mental health center is to sort of create what we call a surrogate family, sort of people that care about each other and want to know what's happening with each other and help each other out when they have problems. And some of the most important things I think is having peers there, because everyone in there has been through some sort of experience of mental health problems. In the church, of course, it is a community of folks that all are bonded together in a way. We call it, we have a covenant. That's what we say. This is how we want to be with each other. So that again is a community that of people that are familiar. That to you. On the street, it's different. Although I will say, when we first started sitting out there, my partner Carolyn and I would sit there, and I think people were just really wary of us. They were, who are these two white people? These white elderly ladies sitting out on the street. What do they think they're doing? When one guy came up to me and said, "Are you selling something?" No. Are you trying to convert us to some religion or something? And I said, "No." Well, what are you doing here anyway?
Sounds like a discerning person.
Yeah. And I said, just trying to make the world a little friendlier place. And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll talk to you." Sat down and started talking. So.
Well, I imagine after 3 years, you start to become like family.
They know. We're always on the same corner, and a lot of the folks now recognize us. I mean, after about 3 or 4 months, that got okay. Those ladies are okay. They're not trying to take advantage of us or get us committed or whatever. They're just there and they're trying to be helpful. And so then we got to know a fair number of the folks that were sort of regularly on that corner, and we recognize, things that were going on, things that I would not have noticed before I sat there, like who's the drug dealers are, for example, and things that were, we even had a drug dealer one time sat down and talked to us for a while, I think he was, just tired. He saw this chair and he wanted to sit down. He didn't know what it was.
That's a form of kindness. You're trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have a few drug dealer friends now from listening on the sidewalk. Not because I'm purchasing their product, but
Right.
because we've gotten to know each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So drug dealers know who we are, and oh gosh, you think of all of the, I'm just there for a couple of hours once a week, but you think of the folks that are there every day and sometimes on the sidewalk all night long, too. And um, wow, what they have to deal with in their life is just unfathomable. So if there's any way that I can make the world a little friendlier for somebody like that, I will. So I think that's one. I mean, they tell you, when you become a minister is because you think it's something that you're called to do, and that's something that why you're on this earth to is to do this work. And that's why
Mm,
that's what I the way I look at it. So
mm,
um, that there's some way that I can somehow make the world a little friendlier place. Now, one thing I will say, we um, after I was listening in San Francisco for a year or two, I started a couple of other groups in Fremont, which is where I live, which is a very different area. And one of the places we listen to is the library, the Fremont Main Library, and twice a month we go out and sit in front of the library, and it's really quite different set of folks that you see in the library than we see in San Francisco. And and it's interestingly enough, around the library, there's homeless people that live like in the bushes and stuff and get around. So they would come and talk to us. And in fact, those are our regulars. When we go to the library. It's some of the homeless guys that are there all the time. and and that was just, you know, um, one guy, he said, first time he walked by, he was one of the homeless guys said, "You don't want to listen to me, I because I've done terrible things in my life. I don't think you want to hear that." And then the next time we were there, he came by and he said, "Well, I was in Afghanistan, and we did some really awful things as soldiers in Afghanistan." And so I just sort of listened to them, and then after a while, he said, "You really will listen to anyone, won't you?" Yes.
yes, yes.
So, anyway, there
I like
lots.
hearing these stories.
Yeah, and then also, there be people in the library. You know, number of the folks we've talked to, they're working on a graduate degree, and they have some sort of exam they have to prepare for, and they're going to the library to read up on whatever the
Mm,
subject is, and they sit down and talk to us for a while, and they're so worried about this exam, and their whole life is going to depend on it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm thinking, boy, the human angst is in all of in the successful people just as much as the people that don't have material success. So to see that how concerned and worried those people are.
yeah.
So,
Well, as somebody who has gotten to speak to you in moments when I've been in incredible angst, you are like the best person to talk to because you are unflappable. You just say, "Okay." And so what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that? Like I'm always like, "Barbara." But it's great because it's like, "Oh, she's not taking any of this on and I can really just say this to her. Okay. All right, we're good."
yeah,
So,
somehow even all those years of listening to people with really, I mean, many of the people in the mental health center that have some really serious problems, and sometimes I've gone to the hospital with them and things like that, and then some of them have problems with suicidal ideation, and I tell them, I also was thinking of suicide too before I was in the hospital, and it's the worst feeling in the world, and I just feel so bad that you're feeling this way, and so I guess maybe being around that for so many years, I've sort of learned not to. Of course, it's going to affect me as a human being in some way, but not to take it in so that it, disturbs my own peace.
Well, my experience in talking to you is that I always feel that you have this belief that people can rise above the emotional moment.
Mm.
And you transmit that. Like there's a way in which, well, I'm just going to own something. Sometimes I would just like to hand you all my feelings and have you fix it for me, and you don't ever bite. You're like, I'm not going to do, but I know that you can rise above them.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm aware that we're at the end of our time already, and I would talk to you longer, but I have to go see a psychotherapy client myself.
Okay, good.
But I wanted to, that we're going to also air this for those of you that are going to come back and watch the recording. We're also going to put this up on our podcast later. And so you'll get many more times to hear this conversation. But on the podcast, we have this little tradition of offering either a wish or words of wisdom to all of the people that listen with Sidewalk Talk. And before I turn it over to you to do that, I also want to say, please go get Barbara's book. And if you are in any sort of church congregation, will you please forward this video on? Because we want to get more congregations really helping hold people, because boy, do people need it right now.
Here.
Yeah, hold it up. Yes, the baby. We need to wrap it in a baby blanket.
Held. The title is Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health.
Yeah. It's right at the top of your screen if you're watching on video, and for those on the podcast, it's called Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health. So now I'm going to zip my lips and turn the mic completely over to you, and you get to say whatever the heck you want to all of our listeners that are either listening now, will watch this later, or listen to it on the podcast. Either a wish or words of wisdom.
I wish you will find something in your life that you feel you were meant to do on this earth. Because once you find that, and you know that's who you are and why you're here, there's nothing's going to stop you from making it happen, because even if you run into roadblocks, you'll find ways around it. And it also gives you sort of an inner peace to know that you're doing what you were meant to do on this earth, so I wish for you that you'll find that.
Beautiful. And I have to say thank you from all of us at Sidewalk Talk for letting us be a part of your service so that we can receive some of your knowingness for sure. Okay. Means a lot. Means a lot, Barbara.
Means a lot to me too. Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the Sidewalk Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, tell your friends, tell your family, like and comment on the podcast publisher that you're listening from, and subscribe. This will help us get the word out about changing our culture to one of connection.